People of Reddit who have had sex with an in-law or step-sibling or parent. What happened? How did you get into that situation? And did anyone find out? Using a throwaway account for this one. My mom and dad had gotten divorced after she had been cheating with the pastor from our church. Shortly after my dad remarried. We are talking less than 8 months. My new stepmother was also the mother of a close friend of mine. We had practically grown up together since my dad, and she had also been friends since middle school. My friend was 7 months older than me. The situation was already awkward since I had a crush on her daughter for some time. Turns out she was crushing on me too. We ended up secretly dating at 13 and ended up having sex pretty frequently. Stepmother caught us in the act when we were 17. Surprisingly enough, she wasn't even upset. She just gave us the usual sex talk and made sure we were using condoms. She also started her on birth control. She never told dad. We stopped the relationship when we went to separate colleges, but still kept in touch. After about 5 years of growing up and being in separate states, we ended up visiting and restarted the relationship just about a year ago. Yes, dad is aware of the relationship now, though he acknowledged he assumed stuff was happening anyway, but didn't care since we weren't blood related. Also, I'm now engaged to my stepsister. Good for you, man. Not my stepson, but my son's best friend from high school. They had just graduated and my son had moved off to college. His friend needed a place to stay, so he rented my son's room while he was away. My son's friend was a very good tenant. He always paid his rent on time, kept the house clean, and helped out with the man jobs around the house. It was about 6 weeks after he moved in when I felt that he was having thoughts about me. His demeanor changed, his sentences were short, and he couldn't keep eye contact. I would make a risque double entendre, and he would get visibly red. I had divorced my husband back when my son was still in high school and never really found time to start another relationship, so the thought kind of turned me on. So one night, when he came home late from a party a little tipsy, I let him know I knew. He was quite embarrassed at first, but I told him it was alright to take off his pants and lie down. He laid down on the couch, and I grabbed his ankle and knee and began tugging it towards myself. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Pulling your leg," I answered, just like everyone reading this post. Edit. Still no idea what gold actually does, but thanks. Great. Now I have a stupid boner. I did the deed with my mother-in-law once. It still makes me feel dirty when I think about it. I was separated from my wife at the time, in the process of divorcing, and went to my mother-in-law's house to help her with moving some furniture. We ended up sitting around after I helped and had a few cocktails and talked about my separation to her daughter. Fast forward to midnight and 6 drinks later, and all of a sudden I'm looking at her with her jeans to her ankles and bent over the kitchen table. I swear to this day I really don't know who made the first move or how it got to that point. It was crazy. The next day she calls me and plays the whole back quote "I had so much to drink I don't even remember last night" card. I get it. I know it was her way of pretending like it never happened, and I was perfectly okay with doing just that. I saw her numerous times after that, and neither of us acted strange. We just erased it and acted like nothing ever happened. At the time I was about 30 and my mother-in-law was about 50. I've never told anyone until now. Edit. Added until now. Me ice. My dad had started dating following a messy divorce and, after being very coy about his activities for a few months, decided to introduce me to his girlfriend's family. We all traveled to a relative's country house and had a big party. The wine flowed pretty liberally. Eventually it was just me and the new girlfriend's daughter who remained. We'd been getting on pretty well all night, and we were both quite drunk at this point. I stood, deciding I'd had enough fun for one night, and kissed her goodnight. One thing led to another, and we slept together. This kept up for a few months. I'm not sure if dad ever grasped why I was always so excited to visit his girlfriend's place, but I was there in a flash if the invitation was offered. Fast forward 6 or 7 years, and dad married his partner. I was a groomsman. Now I like throwback quote, I have never banged my sister in games of never have I ever. Don't regret it at all. We were in our teens and we're actually good friends now. Edit. Holy beep. I know this all sounds a lot like the plot of a certain type of video found online, but I suppose miracles can still happen. Well, at least you two aren't blood related. Throwaway for obvious reasons. My biological mother died when I was about 5 years old. Dad remarried about 2 years later to a woman who had a daughter who was the same age. We get along pretty well for the most part and years go by and nothing happened. Sometime when we were both 13, my stepmom got in a car accident and died almost instantly. We all took it really hard, especially my dad. Dad started to drink and not be very fatherly to either of us. He was depressed and rarely ever talked to us, and in turn, left my stepsister and I feeling despondent and unloved. One night I woke up to the sound of my stepsister crying. I went to her room to comfort her and calm her down. We both end up crying together, and we just held each other for a long time. I kissed her and went to go and leave, but for some reason, don't really know why, we just kept kissing for a while. Eventually we just ended up having sex. I don't really know why we did it. We had never had any attraction to each other beforehand, and we certainly never planned on having sex. I think both of us just liked the idea of being close to someone. We hadn't felt the touch of someone we loved for so long that I think it was just a way of coping. In total we had sex probably 14 or 15 times over the course of about 2 years. After that we just stopped, don't really know why. We just got over the feeling of being unloved, I guess. No one knows as far as I'm aware. It never negatively affected our relationship, and it isn't awkward between us. It was just something that happened. Edit. Wording. One Christmas my uncle brought my future aunt-in-law over to meet everyone. I was 12, and she had big boobs, like, stupidly big boobs. I got binoculars as a gift as part of a kid's bucket. I thought I was being so clever pretending to look around the room with them, just so I could stealthily, she was sitting 10 feet away, get a full zoomed in image of those lovely jubblies. I did this for like 30 minutes. In high school one of my close friends lost her virginity to her mid-30s stepbrother and began a relationship with him. They didn't grow up together. I always felt like he was a bit sleazy and that he groomed her. We were about 16. The thing is, they're still together, 15 years later, with a kid and everything. It really tore their family apart for a while though. What? A pedophile beeping his family member tore the family apart. What a weird judgmental family. I remember as teens we justified him in our heads because he was conventionally attractive and seemed worldly. Hindsight is a weird thing. This is insane. I witnessed online grooming in a gaming community. There were a handful of pretty young girls, a few adults, and mostly high school age kids. It's freaky how few people cared that the guy was flirting with 11-year-old girls on the internet because he was charming and had an Italian accent. It is insane to me how easily people can ignore predatory behavior because the person doesn't fit the conventional stereotype of creepy fat pedophile. Briefly, during high school, my girlfriend's parents were on the rocks. The mom was sleeping with another guy, and the family was in rough shape. So the dad's response was to go after my single mom. Next thing you know, my girlfriend's dad is having an affair with my mom, while the girlfriend's mom is having an affair with an old flame. They are going on double dates together, and the girlfriend and I are suddenly unofficial step-siblings. And yes, it was awkward, even though it really had nothing to do with us. Thankfully, it didn't last long, maybe a month. Her mom and dad reconciled, and things went back to normal. There was one night they all came over to my mom's apartment with wine. We all drank. The mom and her fling went to a hotel. My mom and the dad went to bed, and then the girlfriend and I went to bed. That was weird. Does that count? Lol. Edit. RIP my inbox. Holy crap, this blew up. Lol. trying to keep up with all the responses. Glad my most upvoted comment is just a hair short of a Roll Tide. Jerry Springer's on line 1. Yeah, we collectively made Jerry Springer jokes while this was going on, lol. Debated using a throwaway account, but doesn't matter. Everyone I know already knows this. If I've ever drawn out my very confusing family tree, I call it the family bush/shrub. I'm the product of just such a situation. But it's even more convoluted than that. You know how everyone has two sets of grandparents, your father's parents and your mother's parents? Well, both sets of my grandparents divorced when my parents were just young kids, and then my father's father married my mother's mother. All of this was a decade or more before I was born. My paternal grandfather legally adopted my mother. She was about 9 years old at the time, and my father was raised by his mother and her subsequent husbands in a separate household, so my parents knew of each other's existence, but weren't raised together. They met as late teens, got pregnant, married, divorced a few months later, and then I was born. Mom was already married to husband #2 of 5 by the time of my birth, but that's a whole other story. I ended up being adopted by my grandparents by age 2. The ones that are my paternal grandfather and maternal grandmother, which makes me sort of a second generational son, since they never had any direct kids with each other, just in their previous marriages. Odd side effects. I'm related to both sides of the family by blood, and I'm the only person in this situation, since everyone else can trace a lineage back to one set of grandparents or the other, but not both. Due to the adoption of my mother by my paternal grandfather, my parents were legal siblings, and due to me being adopted by my grandparents, it moves me up a generation, so I'm also legally siblings with my own parents. Heck, I'm even my own uncle. Never really grew up around my actual birth parents, but they are both great grandparents to my own children. My adopted parents have already died, but being raised by Depression-era grandparents definitely made for a different upbringing, not to mention having lived on a boat for years. Again, another long story. I've only had rudimentary discussions with my parents about what it was like for them in that situation. Apparently it was a bit of an uproar in the family, but it all worked out since I'm alive, I'm fairly intelligent, have all my fingers, and no weird tics or twitches. Best of all, due to their teenage hookups, they now still get to see each other at all family gatherings, weddings, graduations, etc. over 40 years later. And this situation made the seating chart at my own wedding a near impossible task due to me having 3 mothers and 6 fathers: mom, stepmom, adopted mom, father, adopted father and 4 stepfathers. While I was being raised into young adulthood, I tended to always act/relate more like a sibling with my birth parents than a parent/child relationship, but this has somewhat changed after the deaths of my adopted parents to a more grandparent/parent relationship. Just seems to make more sense and easier for my kids to relate to them as grandparents, since that's what they are by blood. Other odd side effects. I was raised as an only child. Even though I have several half siblings, I was raised by the grandparents, my siblings by their birth parents, and I'm the youngest in my adopted generation, but the oldest in my blood generation. And due to the multiple marriages in my parents' generation, some of my half siblings aren't related to the others. One brother and I share a father in common. Other brother, sister and I share a mother, but all 3 have different fathers. So I'm the youngest and the oldest, have siblings but was an only child, depending on how you look at the situation. I've had people ask me what it was like to have such a weird background, but keep in mind this all happened before I was born, or was too young to know the difference, so this is my form of normal. I've never known any other way a family should be set up until I started making my own. I like to think of it that I was wanted and loved by so many people they had to share. Edit. So many people asking for a diagram. Normal response. I have to do this regularly. I'll try to provide one shortly. Edit 2. The sequel appears my joking caused confusion. Sorry about my chattiness and ability to put words in a grinder. People usually assume some weird incest happened somewhere, but it was all clear. Just odd from a legal/adoption standpoint. My parents were of no blood relation, just legal siblings, of which I'm now a legal sibling as well. No, this didn't happen in Alabama. No actual incest. Remember, I kid. I had sex with my brother-in-law, and my family do know, but pretend not to. My sister was married for a short time to a guy who worked and lived abroad most of the year. I never particularly liked the man. I think he wanted to be married to an attractive younger woman who would pretty much do what he say. Also, it was crazy because he was away 8 months of the year. My sister was young, beeping stupid in a lot of ways, didn't really get on with his friends and family, and generally felt like she'd been abandoned. Anyway, my sister, rather than live at his home when he was away, would move back in with my parents. He gave my sister access to a certain amount of money and much hilarity ensued. So I was in my first year of university, and he found out that my sister had been cheating with him. Not only that, she'd done it with several people he knew, and he was not surprisingly angry. My parents, being idiots, decided to hire a lawyer who made things worse, and then the issue over what was happening with the money came up. So I came home from university and my family were about to be put out of their home. Also, I should mention he paid for some of my university expenses. I'm making this way too complicated, but essentially I ended up having sex with him in return for him calming down and letting my sister and family climb out of the financial hole they were in. The sex was pretty weird, and he enjoyed beeping me in my sister's bed way more than he should have. In the end though, he got out of my family's life and that was the end of it. I went to high school with these two girls who had been best friends for most of their lives. In 11th grade, one of the girls started sleeping with the other girl's dad. Older dad too, not a young dad, if that matters to you, and then began a relationship with him. Since she was 16, it was technically legal there. It was mortifying for the daughter because it was a small town and everyone knew. It tore the family and their friendship apart. It was awful to witness. I know it's not exactly what the op asked for, but the question made me think of it. OHH, damn, I feel sorry for that girl. Two of the people you're supposed to trust the most just teaming up to beep over your life. It reminds me of what happened to a friend of mine. His little sister met a girl at school that was a couple of years older, and they start a relationship. But the sister is the kind of person who is really into someone for like a little while, then gets bored, so the girl gets dumped. She and the brother bond and they start having a relationship. But the girl is also depressed, and after a while it goes downhill for them. It's about a half year later, after hearing nothing from my friend and his C's, when one day a mutual friend calls me and tells me that the guy's dad is sent to jail. Apparently he had sex with the depressed girl, his son's and daughter's ex. He didn't get convicted of the sex act because she was already 16 at the time, but he got a year of jail time for a blowjob when she was 15. It ripped the family apart as the wife got divorced and then suddenly eloped. It's a really beeped up thing to happen to a happy family.